The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform one final time. At 22, she had dreamed of this moment since childhood, watching her father polish his medals and share stories of service over dinner. The crisp air carried the sound of marching boots and shouted commands, a symphony that both thrilled and terrified her. Sarah stood among 47 other recruits, their faces a mixture of determination and barely concealed nervousness. The diversity was striking. Former college athletes stood next to mechanics, teachers beside farmers' daughters. What united them was the fire in their eyes, the burning desire to prove themselves worthy of wearing the uniform. Commander Blake Harrison emerged from the administrative building like a storm cloud given human form. His reputation preceded him through whispered conversations in the barracks. 28 years of military service had carved deep lines into his weathered face, and his gray eyes seemed to catalog every weakness in the ranks before him. The silence that fell over the training ground was complete, broken only by the distant sound of aircraft engines. Harrison's voice cut through the morning air with the precision of a blade. He spoke of honor, duty, and the sacrifices required to earn the right to serve. His words painted pictures of battlefields, where split-second decisions determined who returned home and who became a memory. Sarah felt her spine straighten involuntarily, her mother's warnings about the harsh realities of military life fading into background noise. The first week passed in a blur of physical training, equipment familiarization, and academic instruction. Sarah discovered muscles she never knew existed as her body adapted to the rigorous demands. Her civilian softness gradually gave way to lean strength, and calluses formed on hands that had once known only textbooks and part-time jobs. Harrison watched everything. He noted which recruits struggled with the physical demands, who excelled in tactical thinking, and most importantly, who possessed the mental fortitude to push beyond their perceived limitations. Sarah found herself under his particular scrutiny, though she couldn't determine if this attention stemmed from approval or skepticism. During weapons training, Sarah's natural coordination and steady hands caught the instructor's attention. Her marksmanship scores consistently ranked in the top 5%, a fact that earned grudging nods from seasoned sergeants. Yet Harrison's expression remained unreadable, his comments limited to terse corrections and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. The other female recruits formed a loose alliance born of shared challenges. They faced additional scrutiny, their every action analyzed through the lens of gender expectations that had no place in modern warfare, but persisted nonetheless. Sarah emerged as an unofficial leader among them, her calm demeanor and quick thinking earning respect from male and female recruits alike. As the second week began, tensions in the training company started to surface. The initial adrenaline of new beginnings gave way to the grinding reality of constant evaluation. Some recruits buckled under the pressure, their dreams crumbling like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Others adapted and thrived, their confidence growing with each successfully completed challenge. Harrison's teaching methods bordered on psychological warfare. He believed that breaking recruits down to their core was the only way to rebuild them into effective soldiers. His philosophy had produced countless successful military careers. But it also left casualties. Young people whose dreams were crushed under the weight of his uncompromising standards. Sarah noticed the way Harrison's eyes lingered on her during formation, how his criticism seemed particularly sharp when directed her way. She began to suspect that her presence represented something more than just another recruit to him. Perhaps she embodied every stereotype he held about women in combat roles. Or maybe her competence threatened beliefs he had held for decades. The training ground became a stage where multiple dramas played out simultaneously. Personal rivalries emerged as recruits competed for limited spots in specialized programs. Friendships formed and dissolved under pressure. Love interests sparked between young people thrown together in an intense environment where emotions ran high and inhibitions fell away. Through it all, Sarah maintained her focus on the ultimate goal. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to allow personality conflicts or gender politics to derail her ambitions. Her father's advice echoed in her mind during the darkest moments. Stay true to your principles, earn respect through actions not words, and never back down from a fight you didn't start but must finish. The third week of training brought specialized combat exercises that separated the truly committed from those simply testing their limits. Sarah excelled in hand-to-hand combat drills, her movements fluid and precise despite her relatively small stature. Years of martial arts training in civilian life had prepared her for the techniques being taught, giving her an advantage over recruits who relied solely on raw strength. Harrison's teaching style became increasingly aggressive as the program progressed. He pushed recruits to their breaking points, believing that only through extreme stress could he identify those with the mental resilience required for combat situations. His methods were controversial but effective, producing soldiers who could function under pressure when lives depended on clear thinking and decisive action. During a particularly intense exercise, Sarah found herself paired against Marcus Thompson, a former college football player who outweighed her by 60 pounds. The objective was simple: demonstrate various defensive techniques against larger opponents. What should have been a straightforward training evolution quickly became something more personal, as Marcus allowed his frustration with recent poor performance evaluations to influence his approach. Harrison watched with calculating eyes as Marcus applied more force than necessary during grappling exercises. Sarah adapted to the increased intensity, using leverage and technique to neutralize Marcus's size advantage. Her success visibly frustrated the larger recruit, who began taking the exercise more seriously than safety protocols recommended. Other recruits formed a loose circle around the demonstration area, sensing the tension building between the two competitors. Some silently cheered for Sarah, impressed by her ability to hold her own against a physically superior opponent. Others questioned whether she belonged in an environment where physical confrontation was inevitable. The breaking point came when Marcus attempted a throw that violated safety protocols. Sarah recognized the danger immediately and executed a countermove that sent him sprawling across the training mat. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed across the suddenly silent training area. Harrison's expression darkened as he surveyed the scene, his jaw clenching with barely controlled anger. Rather than addressing Marcus's dangerous technique, Harrison focused his wrath on Sarah. His voice carried across the training ground like thunder as he berated her for showing off and unnecessarily escalating the exercise. The unfairness of his criticism was obvious to everyone present, but military protocol prevented other recruits from intervening on her behalf. Sarah maintained her composure despite the public humiliation. She had learned early in life that responding emotionally to unfair treatment only provided ammunition for those looking to justify their prejudices. Her silence seemed to infuriate Harrison further, as if her refusal to break down validated his belief that she didn't belong in his training program. The incident marked a turning point in the dynamic between instructor and recruit. Harrison's criticisms of Sarah became more frequent and increasingly personal. He questioned her motivations for joining the military, suggested she was seeking attention rather than genuinely committed to service, and made subtle comments about the disruption caused by women in combat units. Sarah's fellow recruits noticed the change in Harrison's behavior. Some felt sympathy for her situation, recognizing the unfairness of his treatment. Others worried that associating with her might result in similar negative attention from their commanding officer. The social dynamics within the training company began to shift as recruits navigated the complex politics of their situation. Despite the increased pressure, Sarah's performance continued to excel in most areas. Her physical fitness scores ranked among the top 5 in the company. Her tactical knowledge impressed academic instructors, and her leadership potential became evident during group exercises. Yet Harrison seemed determined to find fault with everything she did, creating an atmosphere of constant tension. The other female recruits looked to Sarah for guidance on how to handle Harrison's increasingly hostile attitude. Some suggested filing formal complaints through proper channels, while others advocated keeping their heads down and hoping his attention would shift elsewhere. Sarah counseled patience while privately documenting each incident for potential future action. Training exercises became psychological minefields where every action faced scrutiny. Sarah found herself walking a tightrope between demonstrating competence and avoiding actions that might trigger Harrison's anger. The mental energy required for this constant vigilance began affecting her performance in subtle ways, exactly as Harrison had intended. Late-night conversations in the barracks revealed that Sarah wasn't alone in facing Harrison's harsh treatment. Other recruits shared stories of verbal abuse, unfair punishment, and psychological manipulation designed to break their will. A pattern emerged of targeting those Harrison perceived as weak or unsuitable, with particular attention paid to anyone challenging his traditional views of military service. The training company began splitting into factions. Those who supported Harrison's methods as necessary for producing tough soldiers, and those who believed his approach crossed ethical lines. Sarah found herself at the center of this divide, unwillingly becoming a symbol of broader debates about military culture and the integration of women in combat roles. The fourth week brought advanced tactical training in urban combat scenarios. The exercise area had been transformed into a mock city, complete with building facades, narrow alleys, and hidden obstacles designed to test decision-making under pressure. Sarah's team had been assigned one of the most challenging scenarios, requiring them to clear a building while minimizing civilian casualties. Harrison observed from an elevated position, his radio crackling with updates from various exercise controllers positioned throughout the training area. His attention focused particularly on Sarah's movements as she led her 4-person team through the complex mission. Every tactical decision she made faced immediate scrutiny, with Harrison's voice cutting through the radio chatter to offer pointed criticisms. Sarah's team moved with practiced precision through the first 2 floors of the target building. Her leadership style emphasized clear communication and mutual support, ensuring that each team member understood their role and felt confident in their abilities. The cohesion they displayed impressed the exercise controllers, who noted their professional execution in official evaluation reports. On the 3rd floor, the scenario became more complex. Simulated hostages were scattered throughout multiple rooms, protected by enemy combatants played by advanced training personnel. Sarah's tactical assessment led her to split the team into 2 elements, allowing simultaneous clearing of multiple rooms while maintaining mutual support between the groups. Harrison's voice exploded through the radio with harsh criticism of her tactical decision. His public condemnation of her leadership echoed throughout the exercise area, heard by every participant and controller. The humiliation was clearly intentional, designed to undermine her confidence and authority in front of her subordinates. Despite the verbal assault, Sarah maintained her composure and continued directing her team through the exercise. Her calm professionalism under pressure impressed the exercise controllers, who privately disagreed with Harrison's assessment of her tactical choices. The mission concluded successfully with all hostages rescued and enemy combatants neutralized according to the scenario parameters. The after-action review took place in a small classroom adjacent to the exercise area. Standard procedure called for constructive feedback, focused on lessons learned and areas for improvement. Harrison instead used the session as an opportunity to publicly humiliate Sarah, questioning every decision she had made and suggesting that her leadership had endangered the entire team. Sarah listened to the criticism without response, maintaining the military bearing expected of a recruit receiving instruction from a superior officer. Her silence only seemed to inflame Harrison's anger, as if her refusal to break down or argue back represented a personal challenge to his authority. The other team members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, witnessing an evaluation process that bore no resemblance to the professional standards they expected. When Harrison finished his critique, he demanded that Sarah acknowledge her failures and explain how she planned to improve her performance. His tone carried clear expectations of submission and self-deprecation, the kind of response that might satisfy his need to establish dominance over a subordinate who had challenged his worldview. Sarah stood at attention and delivered a measured response that acknowledged areas for improvement while defending the tactical soundness of her decisions. Her professional demeanor and refusal to accept unfounded criticism clearly frustrated Harrison, who had expected either an emotional breakdown or complete capitulation to his authority. The tension in the room became palpable as Harrison's face reddened with anger. Other recruits present later described the moment as electric, like the air before a thunderstorm, when everyone knows something dramatic is about to happen. Sarah remained at attention, her eyes fixed on a point above Harrison's head, according to military protocol. Harrison stepped closer to Sarah, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that carried clearly in the silent room. He questioned her commitment to the military, suggested she was unsuited for the responsibilities of leadership, and implied that her presence endangered the lives of real soldiers who would depend on her in combat situations. The verbal assault continued for several minutes, with Harrison's criticism becoming increasingly personal and inappropriate. He referenced her gender, questioned her motivations for military service, and made veiled threats about her future career prospects if she continued to challenge his authority through what he perceived as insubordinate behavior. Sarah's teammates watched in stunned silence as their respected leader endured treatment that violated every principle of professional military instruction. Several later admitted to feeling ashamed of their inability to intervene, though military protocol prevented subordinates from challenging a superior officer's conduct in such circumstances. The breaking point approached as Harrison's tirade escalated beyond any reasonable bounds of professional criticism. Sarah's hands trembled slightly with the effort of maintaining her composure, but her voice remained steady when she responded to his questions. Her dignity in the face of such treatment only seemed to further enrage her tormentor. Harrison's final words before the incident carried a clear thread about Sarah's future in the military. He stepped even closer, invading her personal space in a way that would have been inappropriate in any professional setting. The room held its collective breath as everyone present sensed that a line was about to be crossed, though none could predict exactly what form the explosion would take. The sound of Harrison's open palm connecting with Sarah's cheek echoed through the small classroom like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze as everyone present processed what had just occurred. The red mark on Sarah's face provided stark evidence of a line crossed, a boundary violated that transformed a training exercise into something far more serious. Sarah's head had snapped to the side from the force of the blow, but she quickly returned her gaze forward, maintaining military bearing despite the shocking assault. Her cheek burned with pain and humiliation, yet her training kicked in automatically. Years of martial arts instruction had prepared her body to respond to physical attacks, even when her mind struggled to process the impossibility of the situation. Harrison stood frozen for a moment, his own surprise at his actions evident in his wide eyes. The rage that had driven him to strike a subordinate began to give way to the cold realization of what he had done. His career, built over nearly 3 decades of military service, hung in the balance of the next few seconds as everyone in the room witnessed his complete loss of professional control. The other recruits remained motionless, their shock preventing any immediate response to what they had witnessed. Military protocol offered no guidance for this situation. A superior officer physically assaulting a subordinate during training was so far outside normal experience that none knew how to react. Some later described feeling paralyzed by the conflict between their instinct to intervene and their training to respect the chain of command. Sarah's mind raced through her options with the clarity that often comes during moments of extreme crisis. She could report the incident through official channels, knowing that Harrison's action constituted a serious breach of military law. She could absorb the attack and continue with training, hoping to avoid further escalation. Or she could respond to the physical assault with defensive action, as her father had taught her when facing any attacker. The decision came not from conscious thought but from muscle memory ingrained through years of training. Sarah's body moved with fluid precision as she executed a textbook defensive response to Harrison's aggressive posture. Her hands came up in a protective stance while her feet shifted to a stable fighting position, presenting a clear message that further physical aggression would not be tolerated. Harrison, still reeling from his own actions, misread Sarah's defensive posture as preparation for an attack. His military training took over as he moved forward aggressively, attempting to establish physical dominance over what he perceived as an insubordinate recruit, challenging his authority. His approach was clumsy, driven more by anger than tactical thinking. Sarah's response was devastating in its simplicity and effectiveness. Using Harrison's forward momentum against him, she executed a hip throw that sent the much larger man sailing through the air before crashing onto the classroom floor with tremendous force. The technique required minimal strength but maximum precision, exactly the kind of leverage-based maneuver she had perfected during years of martial arts study. Harrison landed hard on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs and leaving him gasping like a fish out of water. His face transformed from anger to shock, to the dawning realization that he had been decisively defeated by a recruit he had spent weeks trying to break down. The classroom erupted in gasps and surprised exclamations from the other trainees who had never imagined such a scene was possible. Sarah immediately returned to a position of attention, her military bearing restored as if the previous 30 seconds had been erased from time. Her face remained impassive despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, showing none of the satisfaction she might have felt at successfully defending herself against an inappropriate attack from a superior officer. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison struggled to regain his breath and composure while lying flat on the training room floor. His authority shattered as completely as his body had been thrown. The image of a seasoned commander defeated by a female recruit would burn itself into the memory of everyone present, becoming a story that would spread throughout the training facility within hours. Sarah's teammates stared in amazement at their leader, who had just demonstrated the effectiveness of skill over size in the most dramatic way possible. Their respect for her, already high due to her consistent performance and leadership abilities, transformed into something approaching awe. She had not only defended herself successfully but had done so while maintaining the professionalism that Harrison had abandoned. Harrison finally managed to struggle to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and barely contained rage. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely, with his authority undermined by his own inappropriate actions and the subsequent demonstration of Sarah's superior fighting skills. Every principle of military leadership he claimed to represent had been violated by his behavior. The moment stretched endlessly as everyone present realized they had witnessed something unprecedented. A female recruit had been physically assaulted by her commanding officer and had responded by putting him on the ground in front of witnesses. The implications for both their military careers were staggering. Yet the justice of Sarah's response was undeniable to everyone who had seen Harrison's inexcusable action. Sarah remained at attention, waiting for whatever would come next, while internally preparing for the consequences of defending herself against a superior officer. Regardless of how justified her response had been, within minutes of Harrison struggling to his feet, the training facility buzzed with activity as word of the incident spread through unofficial channels. Recruits who had witnessed the confrontation whispered urgently to their friends, while training staff exchanged knowing glances about problems they had long suspected but never openly discussed. The institutional machinery of military justice began grinding into motion with the inevitability of an avalanche. Major Patricia Williams arrived at the training facility within an hour of receiving notification about the incident. As the base's equal opportunity officer, she had investigated dozens of complaints, ranging from minor harassment to serious misconduct, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the complexity of this case. A female recruit defending herself against physical assault by her commanding officer created legal and administrative challenges that would test every protocol in the military justice system. Sarah found herself in a sterile conference room, recounting the events that had led to Harrison's humiliating defeat. Major Williams listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details, while a court reporter documented every word for potential future legal proceedings. The interview process felt surreal after the intense physical confrontation, like trying to explain a lightning strike to someone who had never seen a storm. Harrison underwent a similar interview process in a different part of the building, his version of events already diverging significantly from witness accounts. He claimed that Sarah had displayed insubordinate behavior throughout training and had physically attacked him without provocation during what he characterized as routine corrective instruction. His story painted him as the victim of an unstable recruit who had snapped under the pressure of military training. The 4 recruits who had witnessed the entire confrontation provided statements that corroborated Sarah's account while completely undermining Harrison's claims. Their detailed descriptions of his verbal abuse, inappropriate personal attacks, and the unprovoked slap painted a clear picture of misconduct that violated numerous military regulations regarding treatment of subordinates. Colonel James Rodriguez, the installation commander, found himself facing a crisis that threatened to expose systemic problems within his training programs. Harrison's behavior had been the subject of informal complaints for months, but the good old boy network that protected senior staff had prevented formal action. Now, with incontrovertible evidence of assault and witnesses willing to testify, the situation demanded immediate and decisive response. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate incident as other recruits came forward with stories of Harrison's inappropriate behavior. Female trainees described verbal harassment, discriminatory treatment, and psychological intimidation designed to drive them out of the program. Male recruits reported witnessing unfair treatment while feeling powerless to intervene without damaging their own military careers. Sarah's background investigation revealed a model citizen with no history of violent behavior or disciplinary problems. Her martial arts instructors provided statements about her character and training, emphasizing the defensive nature of the techniques she had used and her consistent demonstration of control and restraint in sparring situations. The evidence painted a picture of someone who had responded appropriately to an unprovoked attack. Meanwhile, Harrison's personnel file underwent scrutiny that revealed a pattern of complaints that had been minimized or dismissed by previous commanders. 3 formal equal opportunity complaints had been filed against him over the past 5 years, each resulting in counseling sessions and promises of improved behavior that were never truly monitored or enforced by his superiors. The media attention began building as details of the incident leaked beyond the military installation. Local news outlets picked up the story of a female recruit defending herself against an abusive commander, framing it within broader discussions about military culture and the integration of women in combat roles. The military's public affairs office scrambled to control the narrative while preparing for increased scrutiny. Sarah's family learned about the incident through news reports, rather than official notification, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Her father, a retired military officer himself, expressed pride in his daughter's response, while lamenting the circumstances that had made such action necessary. Her mother worried about the potential impact on Sarah's military career, regardless of who was ultimately found at fault. The legal proceedings began taking shape as military prosecutors reviewed evidence and witness statements. Harrison faced potential charges ranging from assault to conduct unbecoming an officer, while Sarah's actions were evaluated for their appropriateness under military law regarding self-defense. The case would set important precedents for how the military handled similar situations in the future. Training at the facility continued under temporary leadership, while Harrison was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The atmosphere among recruits remained tense, with everyone aware that their words and actions were being closely monitored for signs of the institutional problems that had allowed the situation to develop. Sarah returned to training while the investigation continued, but her status had fundamentally changed. Some recruits viewed her as a hero who had stood up to an abusive authority figure, while others worried about associating with someone who had physically confronted a superior officer. The complex dynamics of military culture created divisions that would take months to fully resolve. The training cadre faced their own scrutiny as investigators examined how Harrison's behavior had gone unchecked for so long. Staff members who had witnessed inappropriate conduct but failed to report it found themselves answering difficult questions about their responsibilities to protect recruits from abuse. The entire command structure came under review, as patterns of enabling behavior were exposed and examined. 6 weeks after the confrontation that changed everything, the military justice system reached its conclusions in a series of proceedings that would be studied in military law schools for years to come. Harrison faced a court-martial that resulted in his dismissal from service, forfeiture of pension benefits, and a federal conviction for assault that would follow him for the rest of his civilian life. The unanimous verdict sent a clear message that the military would no longer tolerate abuse of authority, regardless of rank or years of service. Sarah's actions were reviewed by a separate board that unanimously determined her response to be justified self-defense under both military law and basic human rights principles. The board's report praised her restraint and professionalism, noting that she had used minimal necessary force to neutralize a threat and had immediately returned to military bearing afterward. Her record would carry no negative notations related to the incident. The investigation's findings triggered sweeping changes throughout the training command. New oversight procedures were implemented to ensure that complaints against instructors received thorough and impartial investigation. Anonymous reporting systems were established to protect recruits who witnessed misconduct from potential retaliation. Most importantly, zero-tolerance policies were instituted for any form of physical or psychological abuse of trainees. Colonel Rodriguez found his own career derailed by the scandal, as higher headquarters determined that his failure to address known problems with Harrison's conduct made him complicit in creating a hostile environment. His replacement, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, brought a reputation for innovative training methods that emphasized mutual respect between instructors and students, while maintaining the rigorous standards necessary for producing effective soldiers. Sarah completed her basic training as the honor graduate, excelling in every measured category while demonstrating the leadership qualities that had been evident from her first day. Her classmates elected her as their representative speaker at the graduation ceremony, where her address focused on the importance of standing up for principles, even when doing so required personal courage and sacrifice. The graduation ceremony drew national media attention, with Sarah's story becoming a symbol of positive change within military culture. Her composure during interviews and speeches impressed senior military leaders who were working to rebuild public trust in military training programs. The young woman who had once been seen as a problem by her abusive instructor was now viewed as part of the solution to institutional problems. Harrison's departure from military service marked the end of an era characterized by outdated attitudes about women in combat and the use of intimidation as a training tool. His fall from grace served as a warning to other instructors who might have harbored similar prejudices or employed comparable methods. The message was clear. The military was evolving, and those who could not adapt would be left behind. Sarah's assignment to her first operational unit came with recognition of her potential for future leadership roles. Her new commanding officer had specifically requested her assignment based on reports of her performance during the training incident and subsequent investigation. The military was eager to retain promising officers who embodied the professionalism and integrity needed for modern warfare. The training facility implemented new programs designed to prevent future incidents of instructor misconduct. Regular climate surveys gave recruits safe channels to report problems, while mandatory sensitivity training helped staff members recognize and address unconscious biases. The changes created an environment where military standards remained high, while ensuring that all service members were treated with dignity and respect. Sarah's impact extended beyond the immediate military community, as her story inspired other young women to consider military service. Recruitment offices reported increased interest from qualified female candidates who had previously been deterred by stories of harassment and discrimination. The military's response to the incident demonstrated its commitment to creating an inclusive environment for all service members. Years later, as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez addressed a new class of military recruits, she reflected on the incident that had defined her early military career. Her message to the young faces before her was simple but powerful. Excellence and integrity were not negotiable, regardless of pressure from those who would compromise either value. The military she had helped to change was stronger because it had learned to value competence over prejudice. Harrison's name became a cautionary tale in military leadership courses, studied alongside other examples of how personal biases and abuse of authority could destroy careers and damage institutions. His legacy served as a reminder that leadership was a privilege that could be revoked when it was misused to harm those under one's command. The training facility where the confrontation occurred was eventually renamed in honor of military personnel who had demonstrated exceptional courage in defending their principles. Sarah's name was added to the memorial wall, not for putting her commander on the ground, but for the quiet dignity and professionalism she had displayed in the aftermath of an impossible situation. The changes triggered by one moment of violence created ripple effects that improved military culture for generations of service members who would never know the names of those who had fought to make their experience better. Sarah's legacy lived not in the physical confrontation that made headlines, but in the systematic improvements that followed and ensured that future military personnel would serve in an environment that valued their contributions regardless of their background.